The fertility clinic's waiting room smelled of antiseptic and crushed dreams. Nira Valdris pressed her palms against the cold metal chair. Watching couples emerge from consultation rooms with either tear-stained faces or cautious smiles, she had seen both expressions in the mirror over the past 3 years. Nira Valdris. The nurse's voice cut through the sterile air. Dr. Kellum's office felt smaller each time she entered it. The same faded motivational posters. Same stack of pamphlets about alternative family planning options that she'd refused to touch for months. This time, however, the doctor's expression told her everything before he spoke. "The latest round wasn't successful," he said gently, his weathered hands folded across her file. "And given the scarring from the infection last year, I'm afraid we've exhausted our medical options." The words hit her like physical blows. Exhausted. Options. "What about the new treatments from the core worlds?" she asked, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "The cost would be... ... He named a figure that represented more credits than she'd see in 5 lifetimes working the textile looms. "I'm sorry, Nira. Sometimes the body simply can't heal what's been damaged." She walked home through the industrial sector's winding streets in a haze. The familiar sounds of machinery and steam vents seemed muffled, as if she were moving through water. The apartment she shared with Tomas sat above a fabrication shop. Their windows overlooking the perpetual haze of the factory district, Tomas was waiting in their kitchen, his dark eyes searching her face for answers she couldn't give. "Well?" he asked. "It's over," she whispered. "There's nothing else they can do." The silence stretched between them like a chasm, where she watched his shoulders sag, watched hope die in real time across his features. They had built their relationship on the promise of a future filled with children's laughter, family dinners, school events, and bedtime stories. "Maybe we could save for the core world treatments," she offered desperately. "Take extra shifts, sell some things, Nira." His voice was soft but final. "We can't live our entire lives chasing something that might never happen." That night, he slept on the couch. By morning, half his belongings were gone, along with a note explaining that he needed time to figure things out. The phrase felt like a knife twist. She knew what it really meant. He was figuring out how to build the family he wanted with someone whose body could cooperate, the neighbor's whispers. Started within days, barren, broken, cursed. The words followed her to work, where her supervisor quietly suggested she might be happier with a transfer to the night shift, away from the younger women with their growing bellies and shared maternity leave plans. 3 weeks later, standing in the rain outside the clinic where it had all ended, Nira finally understood what abandonment truly meant. The storm over Calith Prime's industrial sector raged with unusual fury, turning the narrow streets into rivers of rust-colored water. Marcus Webb pulled his coat tighter as he navigated the flooding pathways to salvage crates balanced carefully. In his arms, the abandoned textile factory he'd claimed as home was still 6 blocks away, but the weight of scavenged circuit boards and copper wire made each step deliberate. At 42, Marcus had learned to move through the world with minimal footprint. Former military engineers weren't exactly welcome in civilian districts, especially ones who'd walked away from their commissions after questionable orders. The factory suited him, isolated, functional, forgotten by everyone who mattered. He turned into Factory Row, where broken streetlights cast intermittent pools of yellow across the flooded pavement. That's when he saw her. She stood beneath a collapsed awning, completely soaked, but somehow still upright. Her auburn hair clung to her skull, and her work clothes, the standard-issue coveralls of a textile worker, were plastered against her thin frame. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. Green and hollow, like someone who'd run out of places to go. Marcus had seen that look before, in mirrors after particularly brutal missions. The expression of someone who'd lost the ability to expect rescue. "You're going to freeze out here," he called over the rain. She turned toward him slowly, as if sound took effort to process. "Doesn't matter," she replied, her voice barely audible. "Above the storm, nobody's waiting for me to get warm." The words carried a finality that Marcus recognized. He'd used similar phrases himself when explaining why he lived alone. why he avoided the veteran support groups, why he preferred trading with strangers to maintaining relationships. "What's your name?" he asked, setting his crates down to spite. "The flooding street, Nira." Ah. She studied his face, searching for the inevitable moment when he'd make his excuses and continue walking. "You should go. The storm's getting worse." Instead, Marcus stepped closer. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with prematurely gray hair and scars along his jawline from shrapnel that army medics had removed years ago. His presence should have been intimidating, but something in his weathered features suggested safety rather than threat. "My place is close," he said simply. "Hot food, dry clothes, working heater. No strings attached." Nira's laugh was bitter. "Men always say that. What do you actually want? For you not to die of hypothermia in my neighborhood?" Marcus replied. "Bad for property values." The unexpected humor cracked something in her defensive posture. She looked down at her waterlogged boots, then back at his steady gaze. Every survival instinct screamed warnings about trusting strangers, especially men who offered shelter without obvious motives. But hypothermia was a more immediate threat than whatever ulterior motives he might harbor. "One night," she said finally,
"Oh."
"then I find somewhere else." Marcus nodded and retrieved his crates. "Fair enough." They walked in silence through the industrial maze, past shuttered workshops and abandoned loading docks. The factory Marcus called home had once produced high-end fabrics for the core worlds. Now its main floor served as his workshop and living space, heated by a massive furnace he'd rebuilt from salvaged parts. Inside, the storm's fury dulled to a manageable rumble. Marcus set his crates aside and activated the heating system, watching Nira take in her surroundings with the careful assessment of someone accustomed to calculating escape routes. "Showers through there," he said, pointing to a converted office space. "I'll find you something dry to wear." As hot water hissed through old pipes, Marcus prepared a simple meal from his store's protein bars dissolved in heated broth, supplemented with preserved vegetables. Nothing fancy, but warm and filling. He'd learned to cook for one person, measured, portions that left no waste. When Nira emerged, wrapped in his spare coveralls and a thermal blanket, she looked younger somehow. Fragile, but no longer defeated. "Thank you," she said quietly, accepting the bowl he offered. "Don't thank me yet," Marcus replied, settling into a chair across from her. "You might decide I'm terrible company." For the first time since he'd found her in the rain, Nira almost smiled. 3 days had passed since the storm, and Nira showed no signs of leaving. Marcus found this didn't bother him as much as it should have. She moved quietly through his space, never touching his tools or disturbing his routines, but somehow making the cavernous factory feel less empty. On the 4th morning, she surprised him by examining the industrial looms that still dominated the factory's main floor. "These are Kelmer Series 7 South," she said, running her fingers along a dust-covered frame. "Top of the line 20 years ago? Someone stripped the control modules, but the mechanical systems look intact." Marcus looked up from his salvage sorting. "You know textile equipment?" "I worked the looms at Meridian Fabrics for 8 years. Nira replied, her voice carrying professional pride despite everything else that had crumbled. "Started as a thread runner when I was 18. Worked my way up to pattern supervisor before." She trailed off, her expression darkening. "Before what?" Nira was quiet for a long moment, her hands still moving across the loom's mechanisms with practiced familiarity. "Before my life fell apart. Before I became someone people crossed the street to avoid." Marcus set down his circuit boards and joined her beside the massive machine. "People avoid me too. Different reasons, same result." She glanced at him sideways. "What did you do?" "Murder someone." "Worse," Marcus said dryly. "I had principles at an inconvenient time." Despite herself, Nira felt her lips twitch. "That does sound pretty terrible." Over the following days, she began sharing fragments of her story. The years of trying to conceive, the mounting medical bills, the crushing moment when doctors declared her case hopeless. She told him about Tomas, about the neighbors' whispers, about losing her day shift because pregnant women made her coworkers uncomfortable. Marcus listened without offering solutions or platitudes. I understood that some wounds couldn't be fixed with good intentions and positive thinking in return. He spoke about his military service, the engineering corps. Assignment that had seemed like a dream posting until he realized what his bridge designs were actually facilitating. The refugee camps his structures had helped isolate. The orders to make evacuation routes more efficient by eliminating certain populations' access points. I requested reassignment, he said one evening, as they shared dinner beside the rebuilt furnace. When that was denied, I requested discharge. When that was denied, I walked away. Just like that. Court-martialed in absentia, pension forfeited, military benefits revoked. He shrugged. But I can sleep at night. Nira understood why he'd chosen isolation. She also understood why he'd stopped for her in the rain. He recognized someone else, who'd been discarded by systems that demanded conformity. As the weeks passed, they developed an unexpected partnership. Nira's expertise with textile machinery complemented Marcus's engineering skills. She showed him how to repair the factory's old looms, while he taught her basic electronics and salvage techniques. We could actually make this place functional. Again, she said one afternoon, oil-stained and grinning as a loom successfully completed its first test pattern in years. We? Marcus asked. The word had slipped out naturally, but now it hung between them with surprising weight. Nira felt heat rise in her cheeks. She'd been thinking in terms of partnership without consciously deciding to stay. I mean, if you wanted help with the business, she backtracked. I could handle textile commissions while you focus on electronics salvage. Marcus considered this. His one-person operation had sustained him, but barely. With functional looms and Nira's expertise, they could tap into the industrial sector's need for custom fabrics and repairs. More income meant better security, improved living conditions, maybe even savings. What would you want in return? He asked. A place to stay. Work that means something. It's a reason to get up in the morning. She paused, meeting his eyes directly. A partner who doesn't see me as broken? The word partner carried layers of meaning neither of them was quite ready to explore. But as Marcus watched Nira coax life back into machinery that others had abandoned, he realized she was offering him something he'd stopped believing in. It's the possibility that two damaged people might create something worthwhile together. Equal. Partners, he said finally. 50-50 split on all profits. Nira's smile was radiant. Deal. 2 months into their partnership, Marcus's carefully constructed isolation shattered on a Tuesday morning when Lieutenant Colonel Vance Rothwell walked through the factory's main entrance. Nira was adjusting loom tension. When she heard Marcus's sharp intake of breath, she looked up to see a uniformed officer flanked by 2 armed escorts. His silver hair and crisp dress uniform radiating military authority. Marcus Webb, Rothwell said, his voice carrying across the factory floor. Or should I say, former captain. Webb, you've been difficult to locate? Marcus stepped protectively between the officer and Nira, his shoulders squaring into military posture despite himself. My discharge papers were processed years ago, Colonel. I don't answer to military authority anymore. Your discharge was never officially approved, Rothwell corrected smoothly. Technically, you're still listed as absent without leave. That makes you subject to military justice. Out. Nira felt ice form in her stomach. She'd known Marcus had walked away from his commission, but not that he might still be considered a deserter. The penalties for military abandonment could include imprisonment, or worse. What do you want? Marcus asked. Rothwell gestured toward the restored looms, the organized workshop, the clear signs of productive enterprise. You've built something impressive here. The engineering corps has need of your particular talents again. I told you why I left. The Catherine crisis requires different solutions than the refugee situation did. Rothwell continued as if Marcus hadn't spoken. We need someone who can design defensive structures, not containment facilities. Honorable work. Marcus's jaw tightened. And if I refuse?
8.
Then we process your desertion charges. Military tribunal, likely imprisonment, forfeiture of all civilian assets. Rothwell's gaze swept meaningfully across the factory, including this property and any business partnerships. The threat was clear: compliance or lose everything, including Nira's newfound stability. I need time to consider, Marcus began.
How you?
Have until tomorrow morning, Rothwell interrupted. We'll return for your answer at 0800 hours. After the military delegation left, silence stretched between Marcus and Nira like a physical barrier. She could see him calculating, weighing his options, preparing to make another sacrifice to protect someone else. You're thinking of saying, yes, she said quietly. If I don't, they'll destroy what we've built here. You'll lose your home, your work, our work, Nira corrected firmly, and our home. Marcus turned to face her fully. Nira, you don't understand what military conscription means. They'll ship me to some combat zone for years, maybe decades. There's no guarantee I'll survive to come back. Then we make sure you don't go. Her voice carried a determination that surprised them both. For months, Nira had been the one being rescued, protected, provided for. Now she saw Marcus preparing to sacrifice himself the same way he'd sacrificed his military career to avoid causing harm to others. How exactly do we fight the military? Marcus asked. Nira was quiet for a moment, her mind working through possibilities. Then her expression shifted, becoming calculating in a way Marcus hadn't seen before. We don't fight them, she said slowly. We make their offer irrelevant. Over the next 18 hours, Nira implemented a plan that demonstrated just how much she'd learned during her years navigating bureaucratic systems. She contacted every textile business in the sector, calling in favors and professional relationships Marcus didn't know she possessed. She reached out to former co-workers, trade union representatives, even local political figures who owed her family historical debts. By dawn, the factory was surrounded by a crowd of civilian supporters workers, whose jobs depended on the textile commissions Marcus and Nira had been fulfilling. Union representatives demanding due process for their members, and local media documenting what they'd been told was military harassment of small business owners. When Colonel Rothwell returned at precisely 0800 hours, he found his private conscription attempt had become a very public relations nightmare. Clever, he admitted, studying the crowd through the factory's windows. But temporary, maybe, Marcus replied. But public enough that disappearing me quietly isn't an option anymore. Rothwell's smile was thin, but respectful. You always were. Resourceful, Webb. The offer remains open if you change your mind. As the military vehicles departed, Marcus turned to find Nira watching him with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. Thank you, he said simply. Partners protect each other. She replied, that's what families do. 6 months later, the factory hummed with productive activity. 3 restored looms ran continuously, fulfilling contracts from across the industrial sector. Marcus's salvage operation had expanded into custom electronics repair, bringing steady income that allowed them to improve their living quarters and invest in better equipment. More importantly, the space felt like home. Nira had claimed the old supervisor's office as her workroom, its windows offering views of the factory floor where Marcus maintained his workshop. They moved around each other with comfortable familiarity, sharing meals and conversations, planning projects, and discussing dreams they'd stopped believing could come true. Neither had explicitly defined their relationship beyond partners, but the careful distance of those first weeks had gradually dissolved into something warmer. Marcus still slept in his workshop alcove while Nira occupied the converted office space, but their boundaries had become more about mutual respect than mistrust. The morning that changed everything started like any other, till Dr. Helena Kroos arrived with a proposal that challenged everything they thought they understood about family. Dr. Kroos represented the Kethrin Refugee Relief Agency, and she came bearing files about children displaced by the ongoing crisis. The same conflict that had prompted Colonel Rothwell's recruitment attempt. We've been monitoring your business, she explained, settling into a chair between Marcus's workbench and Nira's loom. Your success demonstrates stability, and your background suggests you understand what it means to rebuild after loss. She opened a folder containing photographs and case files. We have children who need placement with families capable of providing both emotional support and practical skills training. Non-traditional families are often more successful with our older children. Those who've experienced trauma and need adults who understand resilience. Marcus and Nira exchanged glances. They'd never discussed children beyond Nira's medical limitations. But the possibility hung in the air between them like an unspoken question. "We're not married," Nira said carefully. "Legal partnership is?" "Sufficient," Dr. Cross replied. "The children need stability and commitment, not specific relationship configurations." She pulled out a particular file. "This is Kess Thorne. She's 12 years old. Lost her parents in the Kethrin evacuation. She's been in temporary care for 8 months, but she has aptitude for mechanical work and textile arts. Her current placement ISN single quotes ta ... optimal." The photograph showed a girl with dark hair and serious eyes, wearing clothes that had been mended multiple times. Her expression reminded Marcus of himself at that age, wary but not defeated, calculating odds, while hoping for better outcomes. "She's been rejected by 3 families," Dr. Cross continued. "Too independent," they said, "too questioning of authority. She needs adults who won't try to break her spirit in the name of making her easier to manage." Nira felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that had nothing to do with biological connection and everything to do with seeing herself reflected in a child's stubborn refusal to surrender. "What would placement involve?" Marcus asked. "A trial period of 3 months with support services and regular check-ins. If it works for everyone involved, you could pursue formal adoption." After Dr. Cross left, Marcus and Nira sat in the factory's main workspace, surrounded by the evidence of what they'd built together. The question of Kess's placement forced them to examine what they'd become and what they wanted to become. "Can't give her what other mothers could," Nira said quietly. "I don't know how to be maternal. I don't even know if I'm good with children." "I don't know if I'm good with children either," Marcus replied. "But I know what it's like to need adults who won't abandon you when you don't fit their expectations." They talked through the night, weighing fears against possibilities, discussing practical concerns and deeper questions about love, commitment, and the various ways families could be formed. As dawn broke over the industrial sector, painting their factory windows gold with morning light, Nira made the call that would change all their lives. "Dr. Cross, we'd like to meet Kess." 3 weeks later, Kess Thorne arrived with a single duffel bag and an attitude that reminded Marcus of Nira on that first storm-soaked night, defensive but hopeful. Ready to run, but willing to stay if given reasons. She took to the factory, immediately fascinated by the looms and intrigued by Marcus's electronics work. More importantly, she seemed to understand instinctively that this was a family built on choice rather than obligation, on mutual respect rather than traditional roles. "So you're not actually married?" she asked over dinner on her 3rd night. "Not legally," Marcus replied. "But we're committed to each other and to making this work." "And you can't have babies?" Kess asked Nira directly. "No," Nira answered. "Honestly, I can't." Kess considered this with 12-year-old pragmatism. "Good thing I'm not a baby then." The laughter that followed was warm and genuine, the sound of people discovering they fit together in ways that had nothing to do with conventional expectations and everything to do with choosing to become family. Outside the industrial sector, hummed with its usual activity, but inside the converted textile factory, 3 people who had been discarded by others were learning that sometimes the most powerful families are the ones we build from scratch.